Hi everybody, welcome back to the studio. My name is Victoria Armstrong and I am the owner of Side by Side Consulting Services. And I just wanted to start by saying thank you so much for all of the positive feedback from my last documentation video. I really appreciated all the likes and all the shares, and I see pedagogical documentation as such a key aspect of the work that we do with young children. And so any way that I can support you as educators with the process of pedagogical documentation, because it's such a complex one, and I mean, I'm learning something new every day and I've been studying it for a while, and there's still so much more to know. So any way that I can support you as an educator with pedagogical documentation, I'm so happy to do that. So with that said, I wanted to share today a really key part of the process of pedagogical documentation that, in my experience, I think is often missing in this process of pedagogical documentation. And that is this idea of studying documentation and making meaning of it. And so it's really such a key piece of what we do, because it's not pedagogical if we're not learning from it. So if we are taking photos is wonderful and creating pieces of documentation is wonderful, but if it stops there and it doesn't get to the part where we're learning from it, where we're studying it with other people, where we're asking ourselves questions, asking each other questions, making changes in our practice, then it's not really pedagogical. We're not learning from it. We're not doing anything different as a result of it. And so this making meaning part and this studying part of documentation is so essential to what we do. And so I think this is oftentimes the part where it gets missed. So like I said, educators will create documentation, and then from there create a next step, or make plans for what to do next. And so that piece in between where we study documentation is such a key piece, because oftentimes what we see and what we document and then the plans that we make from it oftentimes are different after we study it, because we see things when we study it that we hadn't noticed before. When we're in the moment and we're fully immersed in what's going on, sometimes it's hard to really see other things that are going on just because we're in that moment, right? And so we really, for this reason, it's so essential that educators like yourself have time out of the classroom to spend time studying documentation together. That time together is so essential and so necessary in this work, so that we can make meaning of what it is that we're seeing and what it is that we're doing, that we can reflect on it, and that we can ask ourselves and other people questions of, what's going on for the children? What are they curious about? What are they wondering about? How can we extend their ideas? How can we go back with different materials? How can we arrange the environment differently? Is there a question that we can ask? So many things can come from studying documentation, and oftentimes, like I had said, you can study a video and you can see something that you hadn't noticed when you were in the moment. So the studying of documentation is such a key piece. And so I wanted to share today a way that you can study documentation, and that is through using a protocol. And if you're not familiar with a protocol, essentially a protocol is it can be a series of questions or a process to guide you through conversation. So sometimes maybe you've already tried studying documentation. You've created a piece of documentation, you've brought it to someone else, and you've asked, what do you think of this, right? And perhaps the response is, this is great, I love it, this is exciting, love what you're doing here, but the conversation doesn't really go many places, right? And so what a protocol can do is it can help give you focused questions to help your conversation be so much richer, to help you consider perspectives that you hadn't considered before, and to have really deep conversation that helps you to really think through what it is that you're seeing and that you're noticing. And a protocol can do that. And so there's lots of different protocols that you can use to study documentation. There's different protocols that you could use to study a piece of written documentation versus a video versus a series of photos versus children's work. There's lots out there, and I'm happy to share a variety of protocols, but today I thought that I would share one that I think is really all-encompassing and can be used for studying photos, studying videos, studying pieces of written documentation that you've done, and that's the thinking lens. It's called a thinking lens for reflection and inquiry by Deb Curtis and Margie Carter, and I'm going to put the link to that to the full protocol in the box below. But I wanted to kind of walk you through some of the questions that would be in that and how you would use a protocol. So Imagine that you've come together with your teaching team, and if you're fortunate to have a pedagogical leader, that's wonderful, or if you're fortunate to have a facilitator, someone that can facilitate the conversation, that's really helpful. But if you don't have one, that's okay. You and your teaching partner can do this together if you're committed to it. And so what you would do is you would decide on what it is that you're going to study. So you would either bring a series of photos, or you would bring a video, or ideally you would bring a piece of written documentation. So something that you've already had a chance to observe and to think about and to make a little bit of meaning on for yourself, and then you bring it to a meeting with somebody else that you really kind of want to dig into it a little bit more. And so the thinking lens, for example, it gives you a series of questions, and you wouldn't spend time on every single question underneath every heading, because that would take a long time. But the idea is that underneath each heading, and there's 6 headings in this protocol, you would pick one question, and that question would guide your discussion. And what I love about this protocol is it starts, the very last step is considering opportunities for next steps, which, as I mentioned before, is oftentimes what we jump to first with documentation. But what this one walks you through, and I'm going to read out the headings to you, is it first invites you to know yourself. So a question, for example, you might begin by studying is, what delights me as I watch and listen? So it invites you to get to know yourself first, like, why did you respond to this moment in the first place, right? And then it asks you to find the details of the competent child that engage your heart and mind. So look, as I mentioned in my last video, look for those strengths. What are those competencies that that child or those group of children have? And where do you see examples of that in the piece that you're studying? Then next, it invites you to seek the child's point of view. So to think about, what might the child be trying to accomplish with this? What are they noticing? What are they curious about? Why does it seem to be meaningful to them? And so there's a series of questions there that invite you to think about the child's point of view. Then it asks you to examine the physical, the social, and the emotional environment. So for example, to think about how is the organization and use of the physical space and materials impacting this situation. And I love that because it invites you to think about, okay, this situation and what's happening here, how is the physical setup of this classroom impacting this situation? How would this situation be different, or this experience be different, if it happened in another part of the classroom, or there were different materials that were out? It invites you to really think about and engage with your physical space as well too. Then it invites you to think about multiple perspectives, to consider multiple perspectives. So for example, what questions might we ask to get the perspective of the child's family? And so the fact that you're actually studying it with other people, you're kind of already doing that as well too. You're considering multiple perspectives because you're studying it in relationship with other people. But to even add another layer onto that can be to think about, okay, so what might we ask the child's family to get their perspective, as I had mentioned, or who else might we get the perspective of that would be valuable in this situation? And then the very last part of the protocol is considering opportunities and possibilities for next steps. So things like, what new or existing relationships could be strengthened? And I love that question because I think oftentimes when we think of next steps, or where can we go with this experience that happened, is we think about what materials can I add, or is there an activity or another experience that I can offer? But I love this question around, what kinds of relationships, what new or existing relationships could be strengthened, right? Because that's just as important. And maybe this experience was really about the relationships. It could be the relationships, human relationships with each other, it could be relationships with the environment, relationships with materials, it could be a whole host of things. So I love that idea of just inviting us to think about next steps as more than just materials or activities or other experiences, but really thinking about relationships with materials and with the environment and with other people as well too. Or there's a question that invites you to think about your values. What values are impacting this situation, and what values do you want to guide you in your response to this experience as well? So I hope that is helpful. I tried to keep this short, but I realized that it's almost 10 minutes already because there's just so much that I feel like I could say. And I'm trying to keep these videos short. But I hope that is helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. Again, I'm going to put the link to the full protocol down below so that you can click on it and you can read through it. But I really encourage you, if you've never studied documentation with anybody else, give it a go, try it. And I think you're really going to see how there's a shift in your planning and in what you notice when you have that time, and when you take that time intentionally to study and to try and make meaning of what it is that you're seeing and what it is that you're noticing and how you're going to respond in light of that conversation. So again, if I can be of any support, please feel free to send me an email, victoria@sbsconsulting.ca, or you can visit my website, www.sbsconsulting.ca. Send me any questions you have as well too. And if you like this video, like it, share it, subscribe to my channel. I have new videos coming out soon. And yeah, thanks guys for listening. Talk to you soon. Bye.